Hello and welcome to Frankly Speaking, where we dive deep into the biggest news making headlines across the region and around the world, speaking with leading policymakers and business leaders. I am Katie Jensen. On today's show, we speak with His Royal Highness Prince Turki Al-Faisal, Saudi Arabia's former intelligence chief and ex-ambassador to both London and Washington. We tackle US-Saudi relations, his view on the war between Russia and Ukraine, as well as ever-shifting dynamics of Middle Eastern geopolitics, as both oil prices and diplomatic tensions rise. Your Royal Highness, thank you for joining us on the show today. Now, you recently wrote an article for Arab News arguing that the US should be laughing with Saudi Arabia instead of scowling at them. Frankly speaking, who is to blame, and can you explain some of the reasons behind what many are calling an all-time low in US-Saudi relations?
That's a tall question, but first of all, let me say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim wa bihi nasta'in. As far as my writing about laughing together instead of scowling at each other, that was a result of what I thought was an unfair and perhaps thin-skinned reaction to a comedy sketch at the Saudi television station that lampooned President Biden and his vice president. And it is something that I thought the American media particularly would not be much affected by, since they themselves have made lampooning others, especially Saudi Arabia and its leadership and its society, very frequently. So that is why I wrote that piece. As far as the relationship between the two countries, we've always considered our relationship with the United States as being strategic. We've had our ups and downs over the years, and perhaps at this time it's one of the downs, particularly since the President of the United States in his election campaign said that he will make Saudi Arabia a pariah. And of course, he went on to practice what he preached by first of all, stopping the joint operations that America had with the kingdom in meeting the challenge of the Houthi-led rebellion in Yemen against the Yemeni people, and also by not meeting with the Crown Prince and publicly declaring that he would not meet with the Crown Prince, and at one stage withdrawing anti-aircraft missiles from the kingdom when we were facing an increase in the attacks on us by the Houthis with using Iranian equipment like missiles and drones, and other such actions which were basically coming from the United States. As far as the kingdom is concerned, the Crown Prince a few months ago, I think in an interview, said that our relationship with the United States is 90% we're together and 10% we can talk to each other about. So basically, this is how the present situation has come to this stage. And I hope that we'll get over it like we got over so many previous downturns in the relationship.
Well, it doesn't feel like a 90-10 split at the moment. As I mentioned, people are calling it an all-time low in relations. You mentioned a few things there. Of course, Biden infamously delisting the Houthi as a terrorist organization. You also mentioned the missiles as well, the missile batteries being removed as well. What is the sentiment like in Saudi at the moment? Do many people feel that they've even been betrayed by what has formerly been one of Saudi's closest allies?
The people I speak to, and I can't speak for all Saudis, of course, do not necessarily feel betrayed. As I told you, Saudis consider the relationship as being strategic, but as being let down at a time when we thought that America and Saudi Arabia should be together in facing what we would consider to be a joint, not just irritant, but danger to the stability and security of the area, which is the Iranian influence in Yemen and their direction of the Houthis as a tool not only to, if you like, destabilize Saudi Arabia, but also affect the security and stability of the international sea lanes along the Red Sea and the Arabian Gulf and the Arabian Sea. On those matters, of course, the fact that, as you mentioned, President Biden delisted the Houthis from the terrorist list has emboldened the Houthis, actually, and made them even more aggressive in their attacks on Saudi Arabia, and they included in also attacks on the United Arab Emirates. At the time, of course, Saudi Arabia and the coalition that is hoping to restore the legitimacy of the Yemeni Republic and the return of the government to Sana'a, the kingdom, for all the time that this struggle has been going on, has been calling for a ceasefire and a peaceful solution to the Yemeni conflict. And unfortunately, the Houthis have always either not responded to that call or simply ignored it or opposed it. And as we see now, there is a supposed ceasefire established by the United Nations, but the Houthis continue to infringe on that ceasefire and to take advantage of the ceasefire to reposition their forces and replenish them.
You're saying primarily the relationship between the US and Saudi is of strategic importance. Now, we've seen Washington reiterate their commitment to Saudi security. We've seen they seem to be quite eager to exchange calls between both sides and to be able to send officials to the kingdom. But we really have seen Riyadh not budge when it comes to increasing oil production as the White House would have hoped. So what do you feel, in your opinion, what more does the US need to do?
It's not just one thing. I think it's the general tone of the atmosphere. And you're right. America, for example, has been declaring, or officials, American officials have been declaring that they are in support of Saudi Arabia and will help Saudi Arabia defend itself against outside aggression and so on. And we are grateful for those statements. But also, we need to see more on the field of the relationship between the leadership there and the leadership here. And when you say that Saudi Arabia has not budged on the issue of the oil problems that America is facing, basically America itself is the reason for the state that they're in because of their energy policy. You know, President Biden made it a policy of the United States government to cut all links to the what are called the oil and gas industry, and he curtailed the oil production and gas production in the United States. And as we know, the United States has been, in the last few years, the biggest producer of these two energy sources, and yet by curtailing them, that has helped bring up the prices of oil. And OPEC Plus, that was established after the COVID-19 difficulty, if you remember at the beginning of COVID-19 when Russia decided to not to abide by oil productions, and then there was an agreement to bring down production in order to stabilize the prices. That is an agreement that is for the benefit of everybody and for the benefit of the stability of oil prices. We don't want to be an instrument or a reason for instability in the oil prices, as we saw in the past. So that is why the kingdom and the other OPEC members and the OPEC Plus members are sticking to the production quotas that they have assigned themselves. And I just read today, for example, that the recent decision by OPEC Plus to increase incrementally the oil production, and while the agreement is on. So that is in response to the present difficulties that people have in the energy sector. Another factor, of course, that adds to all this is the security issue, the high rates of insurance that have come about as a result of the war in the Ukraine, and plus the European and American curtailment and sanction of the Russian oil industry. All of these things have added to the increase in oil prices. It's not just Saudi Arabia's decision that has not responded to the American request. These are all together make for the difficulty that is facing if you like, the consumer in America.
Okay, well, let's talk about some of the comments from the former US Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton. Now, she told media that America should pursue a carrot and stick policy with Saudi Arabia. Now, how do statements like that resonate with people in the kingdom?
As I told you, I cannot speak for all Saudi Arabians, but I mentioned in the article that you referred to, that I wrote, that we're not school children to be treated with a carrot and stick. And we are a sovereign country, and when we are dealt with fairly and squarely, we respond in like. And so it is unfortunate that such statements are made by politicians, wherever they may be. And all I can say is that I hope that the relationship of the kingdom and the United States will not hinge around or be built upon that principle.
Well, when it comes to the conflict, I saw that in a recent Arab News article, you said that the Ukrainian-Russian conflict has exposed international hypocrisy. Why do you believe that this is the case?
Well, that is, I think, attested to by the way that, for example, refugees from the Ukraine, the way that they have been described in terms of civilizational terms, as being one with the West and one with Europe and so on, as if other refugees from the Middle East or from other parts of the world are not equally human as Ukrainians. That's one discrepancy in the way that Western media particularly has depicted the issue of the refugees. Another one, of course, part of the hypocrisy is the United Nations, and the way that sanctions have been placed on Russia for invading the Ukraine. But no sanctions, for example, have been placed on Israel when it invaded Arab countries a few years back. Those are the double standards and the injustices, I think, that have been taking place over the years.
Well, the Saudi position in regards to the Ukrainian-Russian war is cryptic to many people around the world. We mentioned oil production recently and the fact that Riyadh has so far refused to increase production. Now, obviously, higher oil prices in the kingdom can certainly boost their economy. But there are observers out there who are saying that it shows Riyadh is choosing to side with Moscow. Now, do you think the kingdom has chosen a side in this conflict? What do you think their position is on this war?
The kingdom has publicly declared and voted in the United Nations General Assembly to condemn the aggression against Ukraine that was passed by the United Nations General Assembly. But also, as if you remember, and I'll remind you and others who are maybe listening or watching this, that the kingdom offered to mediate between Russia and the Ukraine. And as a mediator, it will have to maintain a link, if you like, and the ability to talk to both sides. So that is where the kingdom is coming from in how it is dealing with the Ukraine issue. We've had good relations with both countries over the years. And of course, in general, as I mentioned, the kingdom is against the aggression in the Ukraine. But also most recently, of course, the kingdom has contributed to the fund that was established by the United Nations to provide support for the Ukrainian refugees in Europe. So that is where the kingdom stands.
Tell me about these Saudi attempts to mediate between Ukraine and Russia. How much sway do you think the kingdom would have in something like this?
I am not in a position in government to be able to weigh how much weight we have. But It is the offer of a friend to friends, both the Ukraine and Russia, with both of whom we've had excellent relations in the recent past. So it is not for me to say whether there is weight or leverage that the kingdom has in that. But the offer is there.
Well, going back to that Arab News article we were discussing, you've called out the international hypocrisy for countries' treatment of Israel. Now, you say not only did they invade 3 Arab countries back in 1967, but claimed parts of those territories as their own. Frankly speaking, do you think the international community should be imposing sanctions on Israel in the same way that they have to Russia?
Absolutely. And I don't see what the difference is there between the two. Aggression is aggression, whether it is committed by Russia or by Israel. And yet there has been no such effort to sanction Israel.
Well, several Arab countries such as Egypt and Jordan, and more recently the UAE, Bahrain, Sudan and Morocco, they have normalized ties with Israel despite some of the violations you've been talking about. Could perhaps embracing Israel be a more productive policy?
I've seen no evidence of that. Egypt has been in peace, if you like, with Israel since 1979. Jordan since a couple of years after that. More recently, our brothers in Abu Dhabi and the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain and the Sudan and Morocco have also signed peace agreements with Israel. And yet the situation in the West Bank at Gaza is still the same. The Palestinian people are still occupied. They're still being imprisoned willy-nilly by the Israeli government. Attacks and assassinations of Palestinian individuals take place almost on a daily basis. The stealing of Palestinian land by Israel continues despite the assurances that Israel gave to the signatories to the peace between the United Arab Emirates and Israel. So there is no sign whatsoever that appeasing Israel is going to change their attitude.
Now, Saudi Arabia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs has already said they will not normalise ties with Israel without an agreement that would have a Palestinian state with its capital in East Jerusalem and a fair solution for Palestinian refugees. Now, frankly speaking, many say this is highly unlikely. Does that mean Saudi will never normalise ties with Israel?
Well, I will go by the statement of the Foreign Ministry. International affairs and positions of countries change over time, and hopefully for the better. For example, on the issue of the treatment by Israel of the Palestinians, I think there is much more awareness today in the world that that occupation has been not only vicious and unacceptable, but that something should be done about it. A few years back, if I remember correctly, a few parliaments in European countries have declared that their governments should recognize Palestine as a state. So there is progress there, and I hope that there will be more progress. So things are not going to remain status. Look what happened to South Africa when they were, apartheid state, and how the world community, when it finally turned on them, they removed that apartheid status from their policy. And hopefully the same thing will happen in Israel.
Well, another country that has been in the headlines in recent months is Afghanistan. Now, last year you published the Afghanistan File, which is essentially your memoir as intelligence chief of a unique era in that country during the Soviet invasion in the 1970s. Now, as you know, it's surreal in many ways that the Taliban returned to power around the same time that you published your book. So frankly speaking, what were the first thoughts that crossed your mind when you witnessed their return?
I don't know. I think I was as surprised, perhaps, as others were, that America would just pack up and leave in the way that it did. without leaving some kind of stable continuity to whatever was happening in Afghanistan and the support for the then government of Afghanistan. After all, they were there for 20 years. I would have thought they would have prepared themselves much better. But in my book, I also reached a conclusion, I think, and I refer to it now, which is that when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, they wanted to turn Afghanistan into a communist country. And they failed because the people simply did not accept that. And when, after the September 11th affair and the Taliban refusing to hand over bin Laden to the Americans because of that, and America then invading Afghanistan, America and the West in general wanted to turn Afghanistan into a Western country. And that has failed. So my position is, and my belief is that when attempts are made from outside countries and outside of people's own interests and their background and their culture, inevitably those attempts will fail. And the two examples are there for us to see and to acquire. Pardon?
So I was going to say, I think you make a fascinating point there. I know in a recent interview with Saudi television, you told the host Sami Al-Jaba in a clip that's been widely circulated on social media that one of the biggest lessons learned from both the Soviet invasion and the American invasion of Afghanistan is that no country can conquer another and impose its values and way of life on other people forcibly. So tell us about that. And now that the Taliban are back, will they last and for how long?
I don't know how long they will last, but I've written before and I've said publicly, I think that we should not ignore the Afghan people. They are the ones who have been paying the price of all that's been happening in Afghanistan since the Soviet invasion. And so providing humanitarian aid to the Afghan people is a prerequisite. It's not a choice. And that is why the kingdom led the Islamic Cooperation Conference to establish a fund to help the Afghan people. As far as the Taliban are concerned, they publicly said that, for example, that they will not support any groups that may want to harm other countries, that they will guard the rights of the human rights of all of the citizens of Afghanistan equally, whether it is in terms of education, in terms of women's rights, and so on and so on. So I've said publicly that they should be kept under a careful and watchful eye as to whether they implement what they promised. And upon their response to what they said they will do and their implementation of what they will do, then countries should decide whether to deal with them or not. For the moment, perhaps it's a bit early to tell, but there are no still positive signs that the Taliban are fully committed to what they said they will do.
Well, on a more optimistic note, among the many Islamic world leaders who visited the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia during the holy month of Ramadan was Turkish President Erdogan. Now, of course, Ankara and Riyadh have certainly had several disputes and disagreements over the years, but are we seeing a new chapter unfold in bilateral relations?
I hope so. I think the leadership in Turkey has come to realize that their previous animus, if you like, towards the kingdom and so on, was not serving anybody's well-being and purpose, especially the Turkish people. As you know, historic links bring us together with Turkey, not just in terms of geography, but also in terms of human relations, family ties between the two countries. My own grandmother was of Turkish extraction, Circassian actually, and so on. And in terms of economic well-being, the relationship between the two countries should be one of the best in terms of benefit for both countries whether it is in terms of trade, in terms of construction, in terms of development projects, in terms of investments by Saudi Arabia and Turkey and so on. So all of that, I hope, will be restored now that the relationship is hopefully back to normal.
Well, certainly we have seen a major new direction, particularly after the visit of Erdogan. And finally, also on a more positive note, there seems to be some optimism recently with regards to Yemen. We've seen the Riyadh agreement and the Ramadan ceasefire take place. Do you think there is enough momentum there for a lasting and conclusive peace deal? And what should the Saudi role be if and when the war ends, considering that Yemen is your southern neighbour?
Well, we live in hope. I've always maintained that ceasefire agreements, as they have been attempted by the United Nations, particularly on Yemen, have lacked one crucial aspect which has not led to their success, and that is a mechanism to enforce the ceasefires. We've seen after the Kuwait meeting back in 2015, I think, or 16, there was a ceasefire, but it led nowhere. And then there was the Swedish-sponsored ceasefire attempt back in 2018, I think, or 19, and equally without much success there. Saudi Arabia's own efforts at unilateral ceasefires, which were declared during the recent years, have led nowhere because there is no mechanism to implement the ceasefire. Hopefully that with the new impetus, if you like, or drive by the United Nations and by the world community to bring the fighting to an end, that some sort of instrument can be implemented whereby, if anything, at least the person or the group that does not abide by the ceasefire is publicly shamed by the world community. That has not happened yet. I have not seen yet the United Nations saying that the Houthis are not abiding by the ceasefire. So I hope that they will have the courage, the courage and the moral courage in order to stand up and say who is at fault here.
There's certainly some major difficulties still to be overcome, but it really has been the largest political shift that we've seen on the war in Yemen in a very long time.
Yes, indeed.
Your Royal Highness Prince Turki Al-Faisal, thank you so much for your insights today. We appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.